Yo, so sorry I've had to resend the chain so many times. I think I might have misspelled Emily's email, but it should be good now. Are people there? Oh, yeah, Rayvon.
Yes, it was,
Yeah,
Rayvon. Yes, it was. Period.
Put it back on?
I mean, we'll see how much time we have left. Like we don't already know. Okay, but is everyone ready to go? Okay, yep. Pretty good?
Yeah.
Not you, just okay.
Just what?
When we sit alone in the thick of wanting to be anywhere other than where we are, we remember that time. What we remember of them resides here, all of them. Here we skip down the yellow brick road again and again, hoping to find the same home and success that brought the niggas before us. Here we remember the loop and all the ways to close it. Stories of redaction, the debate plantation, and the black queen who told Uncle Sam that he could fuck all the way off echo in our ears. The Falcon landed here not too long ago with more stories and strategies of resistance. They tell us to forget. They tell us that was then and this is now, as if they aren't connected. Welcome to college policy debate, where eventually every fabulation and theorization is laid to rest. Resolution after resolution, we are told to forget those who came before us and everything they taught us in the pursuit of arbitrary knowledge, the right knowledge, white knowledge, the effort to maintain normalcy or stasis in the name of preserving a model that prescribes a certain content, certain tone, certain dialect, and those who see debate as a multifaceted art form, spaceship, or home at the end of the yellow brick road has exhausted us.
The Zoomification of debate has only accelerated this logic and desire for normal. Moden, Harney, and Shakaitis in 21. Rather than talking about how to make things common, it's more the case that sharing is the default. It gestures less towards needing to find ways to collaborate and more towards the necessity of stopping the processes which have stopped us from collaborating and sharing. We have to find some other reason for doing what we are doing, because it is not because we're the best at it. It becomes clear that we are not the ones to sit in judgment, and this means we can practice nothing but open admissions and open promotion in the places where we teach. Service becomes the answer to all the anxieties about allyship in class. And service is debt, partiality, incompleteness, and action.
Debate rather should be embraced as a community, ideas, theorization, rituals, all incomplete and strung together in chords.
It's gathering in a small room to tell the most powerful jokes of all time. It's reminding niggas to say nigga with their chest or not at all. I wonder what the weather's like in Pittsburgh. Different seasons, a different rhythm, but different doesn't mean separate. Doesn't mean you can't share a Coke with your best friend at CEDA. Different process, and it's process over product, but it's better all incomplete. Sharing a walk around Ogden. Different music in our speech, but we make it make sense. Speech after speech, they're all the same poetic in their continuation, but never done, never new. Moden, Harney, and Shakaitis in 21. Things happen with you just having ongoing conversations and spending time together. And then every so often, there's a congealment of what already happened. Rather than being planned, they just emerge. We wanted to stay afloat and adrift in this common wind. We don't worry about the university anymore. The task then is to heighten the contradiction, rather than worry about governance or the sharpness of our critique of the university or our complicity with it. We could stop all the critique and we could start to write about what we love, the ongoing red and black abolition. And this could take the form of criticism instead of critique. Criticism like what collectives do because they want more collectivity. This kind of love I'm talking about is not liberal. It's the love made up of joy and pain, all incomplete. And you can't love something or someone by yourself. We have to love commonly, collectively, entangled. This book has all these voices.
Louisville began by slowing it down, grounding some of us, because there is power in a nigga's voice. You never know who's listening. It's been said that at the end of the yellow brick road, there could be a home for us here. And if not, shit, you can walk away with crowns that you didn't have before. Jay reminded me of the power of my own body and the mechanics of the prostitute. Niggas went all topsy-turvy way before debate would even consider the world was upside down. Liberty HT said, if you know, you know, and that shit hit different for hoes, you know? It is in the corridors of academia and the hallways of hotels where the real shit happens.
The role of the ballot is to promote the intimacies of entangled relationality through the promotion of the polyrhythm. The app clears space for niggas to tap into the frequency and recognizes the value in the then, now, and yet to come. It's an affirmation of the work that got done before we ever entered this room and creates the potential for energy and communities of care. Moden, Harney, and Shakaitis in 21. I'm really just continuing, picking up where we never left off, making nothing out of something. Everybody already knows this beat and the hook. It's not about us. We accept traveling on the common wind. Our rhythm comes through to people as a kind of insurgent information about the obvious, a cadence in that common wind. We were looking for poetry or for the poetic in everything we read. It meant also being interested in the poetics of everyday speech and the common tongues of the people that we grew up around. We're just fascinated by the rhythm and the music of their speech. There are some traditions that we're in. Our writing sounds like something, we're sounding like something, is sounding like something broken or cracked or dubbed or overdubbed. And because we're overdubbed, we're visitors who are always visiting and who are always being visited. Maybe there was no way for us not to sound like something, given the various places where we're coming from. Maybe we can or also tap into some kind of poetic force. Then there's this other question of rhythm that has to do with the fact that our writing is a form of correspondence. The normal rhythm is predicated on proximate presence, on being there with the person. Most of the time, we're not there together in the same place, and we're not playing at the same time. There's all these irregularities. We've been learning how to negotiate that, not overcome it, but actually ride it. We use the gaps and the pauses as ways to think more clearly and more effectively with one another. There's a rhythm, definitely, but it's an irregular rhythm. And not only irregular compared to some metronomic norm, but irregular and being overpopulated. The beautiful thing about the polyrhythm is that even though it's just the two of us, it's way more than that. Our parents, our families, our partners, and the various children in our lives, but also all these other people that we're always working with and talking with and thinking with and reading with. There's always a lot of sound in our head. And debate's refusal to acknowledge indebtedness is an active choice that tacitly endorses completeness. Being complete sounds cool and all on face, but actually fuck completeness because it is the grounds for racialized and gendered terms of order. Moten and Harney and Shakaitis in 21. Incompleteness reminds me in certain ways of how before you talked about debt, not as this crushing condition, but as something that in being unpayable is the principle of sociality. All those things we owe to each other. Incompleteness strikes me as similar in that it's not incompleteness as a problem, like there's something lacking in myself which is fulfilled through another person, but rather as a permanent state which is more of a blessing or something to be preserved. Fuck completeness. Not only that, fuck completeness as a way of understanding anything about what love actually is. It doesn't leave you intact. It disturbs and disrupts your individuation. It obliterates not only the possibility of, but the desire for individuation. The idea of completeness is ridiculous. There's no end to the ways it continually seeks to destroy our shared capacity to breathe. It necessitates the constant brutalization of all the people in the world who resist, who practice modalities of social existence that are not predicated on those terms of order. We advocate for incompleteness. To preserve the totality is to refuse its completion. That's our experiment. There's no expectation of completeness. When things go bad, the other will be able to feel and understand that pain deeper and more fully than anyone else could. The relationship makes it possible to feel in ways that would not be possible by oneself. It's not that anything gets fixed, it's that everything is felt more deeply, both in terms of developing greater capacity to affect and be affected by the world. Let's use the word sharing in order to take into account the righteous and legitimate critique of a certain kind of racialized and highly gendered and brutal empathy that CEDA Hartman gives us in Scenes of Subjection. What we're interested in is a social physics of sharing that is interactive and which is predicated on this interplay of losing and finding and seeking. This is something to which we can't simply declare our allegiance. We have to practice it. That practice bears a revolutionary imperative.
And then ready whenever you are.
Okay. So I guess the first question is there a world in which anyone can be complete in the sense that the AF is described?
Well, I guess that begs the question of like your understanding of like completeness, right? I think that the way that the AF has described it is that completeness is not necessarily a lack, right? But rather a compounding or like an existence or like an overpopulation of a lot of voices in our heads. It's what influences us. It's the feelings that we feel, the way that we relate to one another. It is a lot of things, not necessarily a lack of things. And it's how do we reconcile all of those different voices, all those different needs.
All right.
Yeah.
Got you. So then I guess if the sort of premise of that sort of division of completeness versus incompleteness is like moving beyond like the sort of traditional definitions of like what being incomplete means, is there like a point of resolution to that, like, you know, different voices and different relationships, or is it like an ongoing thing?
Well, I think that the app does say that it is a sort of ongoing project, right? And I think that's true of a lot of things, both in debate, both outside of debate, right? Like all of us need different things at different times, which is where that sort of idea of incompleteness comes from, right? The idea and what the app says is that debate sort of calls for us to focus only on projects that can be completed, i.e. why traditional debate thinks that we should only focus on plans that have complete solutions, or that's how we come to evaluate those things. The AF says that there is value in that incompleteness insofar as it allows space for niggas to be incomplete, to lean on one another to do those things. But also it says that in that sort of like strive for completeness, it's not that things can't get done, right? Or that something cannot be done in the face of a certain violence. That is to say that just because something is complete or something is solved for one nigga or one person, right, doesn't mean that it's complete or solved for someone else, right? Which is the different needs, different seasons, different times, different places argument.
Okay, got you. So the next thing then, why is incompleteness good in this debate?
Yeah, so I guess again, it has really, like, that's basically everything that I said before, right? Is that constantly striving for a traditional understanding of completeness, insofar as it's concerned, it's exhausting. It is exhausted to always strive for something complete, because there is not a world in which there's ever a complete solution to really anything, to be honest.
Got you. Okay, and then based on that, pretty sure I know the answer, but I just want to make sure. Completeness then is bad because it produces those structures of exhaustion.
I missed, sorry, we can't, the bell, it's a lot.
Bet. Yeah. Based on that, completeness is bad because it produces those structures of exhaustion, right? Or is there a part of that that I'm missing?
Well, again, I think that that's looking sort of for like a complete answer. So, I mean, it seems kind of tautological the way that that's being asked, but.
Okay. Send the one in C right now. Do y'all mind if I go to the bathroom before the one in C starts, actually? While I was in the bathroom, did everyone get it?
No, I didn't.
Oh wait, that's because I didn't send it. I'm sorry. All right, it should be sent now. Can I just get a thumbs up when everyone's gotten it? Okay, I got Rayvon, Anthony, Amber, Emily, Gabby, and then USC Kansas. Cool.
Yeah.
Our interpretation is that completeness means word that in 6, the state of being complete and entire, having everything that is needed. Incompleteness means Wiktionary in 12, the state or condition of not being complete or unfinishedness. Their call for incompleteness misaligns with the requisite rules of judges in this debate. The concept of filling in the blank and filling the blank in answer to the better debating was who did the better debating. The process of announcing and explaining decisions and the submissions of ballots to tab are all part of a progression of arguments to completeness. That is a theoretical opposite of leaving the round incomplete by not deciding. This shows why the process of incompleteness as posited by the app is a flawed and double turn with their advocacy. You should vote neg on the double turn or vote neg to vote app, validating the problematic nature of completeness and determining that the app's and neg's arguments are inconclusive, resulting in you voting negative on presumption. They may claim that there is a difference between the physical submission of a ballot and the separate relational aspects of completeness, or even the ongoing nature of debate, meaning the ballot is not an endpoint, but that is problematic on two levels. First, it proves the intangibility of their claims of incompleteness as insufficient to result in adjudication of this debate based on the arguments at hand without continuing clarifications about what incompleteness is and isn't. That doesn't mean that it is bad, but rather it means that their role of the judge, their role of the judge instructions, which will come later, are going to be derived from your relations to something else, whether it's blackness or this debate space or your awareness of history, which severs their claims to communication. Second, unless incompleteness has only one meaning, which we don't think it is the case based on the reading of the 1AC, that they have ceded the right to determine the relationality of ballot submission by not advocating for those claims in the 1AC. The K. The 1AC's telling of the Louisville story wasn't quite right and more complicated than their telling lets on. The initial version of structured in 10 weeks of team meetings with the director, Edie Warner, and outside communications with John Bruschke from Fullerton and a series of black debaters and coaches was a call for teams to use ethos, pathos, and logos equally instead of simply relying on logos and virtually ignoring the affective elements of debate. The second label claim was a specific question to each team. How do they and their squad increase meaningful participation in black debate? That would keep stats on black debaters per squad and use that as evidence. This is history we want to share and thank them for their contributions. 6 years before the Louisville project began, Justine was a black woman who was one of the first students who helped start the NYU debate team. She was reading heartfelt personal narratives that won several debates, but at one critical round, she lost an Elam debate at a national tournament to a white male debater who told a powerful story about coming out to his parents. After the round, she sought to console and connect with this individual, only to find out that he had made the entire story up just to win the ballot. The following tournament, she heard teams in the hallway in the 4-1 bracket discussing who were they hitting next when one remarked, "The loud little black girl from NYU." We apologize to Justine for her suffering and thank her for her efforts along with the heroes from Louisville all the way up to the ones at this tournament and in this room today. There's two impacts. That first, sometimes relational completeness is essential. If there were a complete set of rules that punish the acts we've heard of and borne witness to at tournaments, that creates more safe spaces for black and brown debaters that would be both final and good. We don't get to build restorative relationships. There are also the ones created without our choice or consent that we have to navigate. The archive is an institutional imaginary that originates through a trade with death. In the archive, the traumatic history of the world is captured via representation and laid to rest as all as grease for the wheels of statecraft. Representational history is always a means to archive and anesthetize the past, and as such is itself the constitutive violence on which the state rests. The archivist and the historian both inhabit a sepulcher and work on the past in order to silence the dead and transform the past into a prop. That's Mbembe and 2. The archive is rooted in death as an architectural event that death has to occur to give rise to a time. The power of the archive as an instituting imagining originates in this trade with that there will always remain traces of the deceased that testify life did exist. These were enacted struggles debating, engaged or evaded. Archives are born from a desire to resemble traces that should be prohibited from stirring up disorder of the present. The best way is not to bury them, but to bury the remains. Archiving and laying something in a coffin to consign elements of that life which could not be destroyed for removal are assigned to the archives. Assigning them to this place makes it possible to establish unquestionable authority over them and to tame the violence and cruelty of which their remains are capable. Archives have no meaning outside the subjective experience of those who use them. There is no state without archives. The power rests on the ability to consume time. Consuming the past makes it possible to be free from all tech content is to all more unreal, removed from sight and interred once and for all in the sphere that which in the sphere of that which shall remain unknown. The ultimate object of commemoration is less to remember than to forget. We pass to its past considered a communal tool of the state and the society. The archives transformed into a talisman. The pagan cult. The pagan cult of museums are accompanied by removing any subversive factors in the memory. Commodification of memory obliterates the distinction between victim and execution are able to realize the abolition of death. Both the historian and archivist inhabit a sepulcher. Writing history involves manipulating archives, following traps, putting back together scraps, and debris is implicated in the resuscitation of life, bringing the dead back by reintegrating them in such a way that they find it in text a place to inhabit. The historian is engaged in a battle against specters. Historiography and the very possibility of polyseric only conceivable on the condition that the specter has been brought back to life. Being sign he may only speak through one other or be represented by some sign precisely in order better to silence it. And the ban NGT counterplan. We think the adoption adoption of Cal PW's pref model, where some Black women must be pref by each school in their top 25% and boycotting the NDT solves their exhaustion and other impacts better. Three reasons. One, it provides more access. It provides for more access for exhausted teams of color and judges that understand and recognize their value and arguments, as well as forces misguided policy teams to experience and learn from Black women as much as those Black women wish to serve as critics of debate rounds. Second, those Black women would be sitting in judgment of whiteness and problematic debaters on a regular basis. Small chance some of those debaters might even actually appreciate stuff, but channels the toxicity into channels of response and retaliation. Third, we will defend that the prep and toxicity of the NDT are particularly challenging, and that a boycott by schools like Kansas, USC, Wake, Harvard, and NYU has to change the follow-on and brings attention to the need for better attention to care for those communities. Case. Presumption, all of the things that they're talking about, Zoomification, Black debaters being mistreated, etc., all things that are happening in the status quo are inevitable. Voting out does not change that. Even if the 1AC aims towards collectivity, its starting point is tethered to individuation. Their evidence describes a freedom school in Newark where the attempt to make coherent and theorized organizing was self-defeating, proves they can't escape the academy. That's Moten, Harney, and Shukadis and 21. The default sharing needs to be broken out individually. The workers first and the capital sharing first, and then the individual locates the energy source we've been studying and dies. Lessons from the Day by the Day, a book about freedoms, about a freedom school set up by Black women in the late 1960s in Newark now, and Dai talked about the poor women who are keeping diaries on their social reproductive labor. We're doing research that she could never do, as well as them. The woman running the school met some middle class qualified Black women, invited them to the school. The women say we loved them, but had to send the boy because they could not believe that we, as Black working class women, were better to place to theorize this model when and die in the damn saying poor Black women are better researchers than those of us who are institutionally trained. And their second Moten and Hardy and Shukaitis evidence cites the League of Revolutionary Black Workers as inspiration for their method. Failure of the League proves the K impact, since their drive to transparency and awareness raising led to vanguard purges. That's Moten and Hardy and Shukaitis in 21. General Baker and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers said again, this is an inspiration, not a comparison. Did not worry about whether the Ford plant was a good institution or their complicity with Ford. The Ford plan was a job that sustained them as they attempted to take them over. Okay, so under the guidance of General Baker's stance, we could stop all the critique and we could start to write about what we loved. Yeah. Okay. I'm good for cross.
Okay, you good?
Yeah.
Your WordNet definition of completeness says it's the state of being complete. Your definition of incompleteness says the state of being not complete. Why is that not a tautology?
Why is that not a totality?
A tautology.
A tautology? I mean, we just think that incompleteness is the lack of completeness, i.e. anything that is not the WordNet definition of completeness.
I know, you're using the words to define the words. So
I mean, like the definition.
Case. Can I hop in, Eugene?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So definition of incompleteness says it is a form of being unfinished, which is the part after, the part you're talking about where it's not being complete. The second argument is the WordNet card talks about having everything that is needed as being what completeness is. We think that those are sort of foundationally opposed ideas that demonstrate tension between a strategy of being complete and a strategy of being incomplete.
Okay, that's
Alex,
fine.
I think your mic sensitivity.
I'm going to move on. This second one is like, sometimes relational completeness is essential. If there were a complete set of rules that punished the acts that we heard of and bore witness to, that would be both final and good. So I have a few sets of questions that arise from this. One, why is creating a culture of punishment in debate good?
Alex wrote this part of it, so I'll let him answer.
Oh, sure. So the conversation I was having with Will about this portion is that we think that debaters like the one who lied about coming out to their parents to win a round against Justine should be punished and penalized for their actions, because those acts are demonstrably violent to other members of the community, and they should face consequences for them.
In this instance, I'm asking about a culture of punishment.
Right. I guess I'm sort of confused by we think that that's not like an isolated example of like the one time someone like lied to get a ballot. Rather, we think we've identified a structuring problem with the way that people approach debate in the status quo, and said that a good solution would be to find complete solutions.
Should debaters be punished?
Like debaters who do shit like lie about coming out to their parents should be punished. Like obviously we think that.
How do you determine when a debater should be punished?
Right. I don't think I should be the one to determine that. Our argument is about developing complete structures of accountability, norms that are better aligned with and do a better job of responding to the structures of exhaustion that you all have talked about in the 1AC.
Okay. The other thing is that you said that would be final. Why would that be final? Just punishing the person.
Right. The argument isn't that it provides, well, there's a few components to it. One is that it provides a means of redress for people like Justine, who, based on my conversation with Will, wanted consequences for this debater, which we think is a good example of the sort of 1AC's relationship to the history of violence within
that
the
would
debate.
be final for Justine. I mean, you're saying based on my conversation with Will, how do you know that that's what Justine would want as finality, consequences?
Right. I guess I'm sort of confused by we think like the process of imposing consequences on debaters who do fucked up shit is good. We think the 1AC precludes that.
Right?
Yeah, starting.
I have a question if you all are good, NYU.
Yeah, what's up?
What is the net benefit to the ban NDT thing?
Oh, sure. We think there are three. One, it provides access for.
Solves better. How does it compete, though? Why is it mutually exclusive?
Oh, sure. So a few arguments. One is that we think we will forward it as an example of a complete solution. Two is that because we think the 1AC has forwarded the argument that solvency should look different in this debate, we think competition should look different as well, where we have proposed a different theoretical starting point for what the sort of end goal should be, even if we agree on what some of the broader like impact claim and arguments we forwarded are. Like, if solvency should be different, competition should be different as well. We think we've given examples of what we think a complete response to like fuck shit at the NDT would be.
Stopped at 5:35. I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick, and then I'll be right back.
I'm gonna get water in the meantime.
One sec. All the judges aren't here. I'm just gonna send out these two cards.
How much?
What's the order?
5:35. One sec. Sounds like Julian wants to take prep real quick.
We need like one more.
Uh, 5:30. And I just sent those out. Let me know when everyone's got them. The order, Amber's case. Okay, sorry, I was looking for Anthony. Is Anthony? Yep, they're okay. Sorry. Porter's case, the vote negative, vote F shit, the critique, and then the counterpoint. Just show it to me because it's not showing.
Yeah. True, bro. That's so fucking true. I mean, yeah.
Okay. And everyone's good? Shit. A nigga is tired of trying to meet the resolutional debate standard. A nigga is tired of never meeting the expectations of the community in terms of what doing things for niggas looks like. This is what I have, and this is what I have to give. They tell us that was then. This is now as if they were connected resolution after resolution. We were told to forget those that came before us, and everything that they taught us. Vote act, the polyrhythm from the resolutional debate and the drone-like calls for certain types, content, tone, dialect, and certain sort of complete solutions, because there never is a complete solution. A crucial unionist argument they have no game on is the zoomification of debate has complicated the rhythmic potentiality debate by accelerating the distance between us and the way the relationality can actuate itself that allows us to ride the regularity and connect and vibe regardless of distance. The rhythm is something that is felt, not always said, something insurgent about the obvious, which begs the question of what did you feel? Solvency for the app where this debate is going to look different. It's going to feel different for years. The way that we've decided debates and debaters' values off of what they produce. This debate is about what you feel. What did you feel when you heard the affirmative? Did you remember an app you might have forgotten and what it made you go out and do? Did you remember a debater that changed your life whose voices are in your head? Lean into them, find the voices of all the niggas that you might have forgotten and let them guide you. Let us guide you. This is our judge instruction. This is our surrender to just let shit emerge. It leads me to their arguments on the case debate, the presumption argument. There's no presumption. They list all of the arguments of the app, like zoomification, black debaters being mistreated, etc. All of that stuff is happening in the status quo, which we agree, which is our argument as to why the counterclaim and the critique don't resolve any of those things, which is why striving for completeness will always result in a level of exhaustion, because there's never a resolution. But it also places the burden on black debaters to find that complete solution, because no one else ever takes that shit up, which is why the polyrhythm is the thing that you have to tap into, because niggas need to be able to lean on each other in a time where we cannot connect, and where zoomification makes that harder, which is why we blur the lines between this space and that space, and it allows for us to have a conversation of those things. At the very least, you still vote app, because the app opened up the space for conversations of what this community needs, the different people that we are indebted to, and what that conversation necessarily looks like. The re-highlighting of the Moten, Harney, and Shakaitis evidence says that it's not necessarily the default, but rather it's our argument about the ways in which it should never be about trying to fix anything, but feeling more deeply, which is the overview stuff that I do above all of these arguments. The next argument they try to go for is that, our argument is that first of all, I don't know if there's necessarily ever a way that you can signify failure, because different ways that the Black radical tradition has manifested and has done different things for niggas, not all of which of those things have been articulated or are things that you can see, right? It's also about feelings and vibes, etc., which is not something that they have answered given the concession of the poetics of the 1AC, vote after the next up. Don't vote after, vote neg, because they have misunderstood our argument about completeness, which they attempt to preempt, but it's not about definitions. Our argument is that the ballot in the history of debate has never been complete, but only misprioritizes or missignifies what completion looks like, which is my argument in the cross-section of the 1AC about the ways which resolutional debate only focuses on plans and things like that that look like they can complete certain projects, which is why certain debaters prioritize those discussions over discussing interrelationality or the way that violence operates both in and outside of the debate. The Black radical tradition demonstrates that sort of incompleteness, because you vote app doesn't mean that the project is finished, but rather it recognizes the way in which it's a continuous thing and it's something that you vibe or feel with. Our argument is that resolving something in one instance doesn't mean that it has resolved everything, which is our argument about completeness. So just because you resolve a certain thing in this debate does not mean that you completed the project. It just means that you are a part of that legacy. Writing the ballot is all still incomplete, because there's no way to know what the ballot or what the app means for each of the different 5 people that are adjudicating the debate, the way that or what it means for the negative team either, which means that what happens as a result of the app is never the same for anyone, which is also the sort of overpopulation definition of the overpopulation argument that they tend to go for. Also, the argument about how we have ceded our ability to answer that question is ridiculous, because you read something from fucking like Wikipedia and some other shit, which is all of the feelings and vibe shit that I do about the critique. It's time to talk about what the violence of white apologies. Apologies make black people dumping grounds for white shame, and re-traumatize black people, all while giving white people a pat on the back. Judge Jones. In 20, black people are experiencing an overwhelming influx of overdue apologies from past microaggressions. Despite America struggles with accountability when the apology is avoided, accountability is doubly harmful for black people. Apologies turn me into a dumping ground for all the white folks apologize to assuage their shame and continue being problematic and racist. It's time that we talk about the violence of white apologies. White guilt is dangerous. Our society does not ask white people to sit in discomfort. We ask to ask black people being inconvenienced. White people are never asked to be as a black person in my life is uncomfortable, because anti-blackness is a global framework of subjugation. White people make sure you're ready to see yourself before you apologize. If not, your apology will be another white person's attempt to gaslight a black person so that you do not have to do the work. Black people cannot take blows while absolving your wrongdoing. We do not need public displays of fraternity, anti-racism. We need folks to join the movie. You do not need to watch a lynching of honestly a black person and pan-examine your own racism before you hit send on that message. You type for that one black acquaintance who you microaggression years ago. Would think about how useful that will be to the recipient. Ask yourself, am I embarrassed why people believe that they're apologizing for black people, but the apology is for them. The link to the apology argument is the language of the story the story and the recollection that they attempt to tell. Permutation do both solve the critique. The app does not trade off with accountability in debate, but it recognizes that accountability is not a one-size-fits-all complete project. What different niggas need in different moments is necessary and something to account for, because just because an apology or a punishment might have worked for one particular Black person does not mean that it is what another Black person needs. But your homogenization of that is anti-Black in and of itself, because it assumes that all niggas needs are the same. The one I see solves, because sometimes punishment or apology doesn't solve everything. Their language of apology misses the point. There's no one way to fully resolve violence that happens in debate, because those moments are things that are felt in the moment and do not just go away when punishment or apology is administered, which is our argument about incompleteness. At the very least, this off-case position should be viewed as the neg's dubbing of the 1AC, but not in conflict with one of the 1AC, because what you got out of the 1AC is different than what I got, which is a good thing. It should not be in competition with one another, which is our argument about your indebtedness to resolutionary and traditional debate. The histories and people that we talk about informed us are different, and that is okay. The way that you talk to Will is a way that you construct this argument to demonstrate the value of the app insofar of its indebtedness model, which you conceded. The next off-case position, why are you here? Who are you here for? What do you seek to accomplish from this debate or any others? How do you affect the space for others? When will you recognize those who came before you? The Black radical tradition is an unfinished project that we have all referenced and contributed, a cadence that we are all tapping into. The Zoomification of debate has and creates an additional distance between niggas in debate, making the rhythm irregular, which is our argument about the ways that we can understand that there is no one complete resolution, which is the stuff I'll do now on the no link stuff on the time. Hello? Permutation do both. We clearly prep Black women boycotting the NDT isn't something that the app precludes, which means that they can happen at the same time. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. If they try to make it about us attending the NDT because they went to, which demonstrates the criminalization of Black debaters, solves better because it doesn't implicate a trade-off. They didn't explain any of this completeness or competition stuff in the 1NC. The specificity, disadd the rhetoric of teams of color lacks specificity in terms of Blackness, which is violent or racial, because it homogenizes the violence of a multiplicity of Black debaters in different categories. There for subpoint lacks convenience because those teams already prep Black women, but double turns point two, because they said that it would be bad for Black women to sit in judgment of problematic and white debaters, so they forced those debates to occur. Prep and toxicity of the NDT are also non-unique, which is my argument I do in the overview. It's also just not at the NDT that you face those forms of violence, so their answer also doesn't solve it. You force Black women to do more labor to educate white people, which is exactly the performance of the 2AC. The next argument is this debaters of color stuff should also be the lens through which you understand the efficacy or the ability of the counterplan to solve, because of the way that they homogenize different people's experiences and what they need in response to that violence. Our argument is that not everyone needs the same shit. Some people need to step away. Some people need to lean in. Those are all different things. That's not to say that one person's feelings or that one person cannot then become okay or complete or whatever, but it's just like there are so many different things and so many different people in this community that need different shit. And our argument is not that we should never attempt to solve those things or support one another in that. That is why the app is a critique of the performative call for material change or things like complete projects, because in that completeness, Black people are always picking up that word, picking up that labor, and having to do that. All of the off-case positions are functionally calling for the same shit. And honestly, it kind of just demonstrates their indebtedness to that model. Argument is that your relationship to Will, the way that they help you construct arguments, is why the app is good. Because you get different things from the app, and then we're able to have a conversation about that, which is why the vote app to vote or the vote neg to vote app stuff doesn't make sense. Because our argument is that only after the reading of the app, right? Only after Will hearing the app last debate was he inspired to then have a dialogue with you about a certain history, about a certain way that niggas relate to one another. All of those things are necessarily good, and none of them should be in competition with one another, which is also why their attempt to create difference or to create conflict or antagonism between the app and the neg is exactly our point that we are criticizing.
Okay, you good for prospects? This white apologies piece of evidence you read, I guess I'm still a little bit confused about what is the model of accountability that the 1AC endorses, or like whether that incorporates punishment, since there was sort of a reference to like punishment being bad in cross-ex. So just wanted to like get clarification there.
Okay, so one, I think that the cross-ex moment that Julian is trying to have with you is that a flat or a homogeneous model of punishment misses that there are some moments where like violence that happens is one, there's a lack of words for it, cannot always be explained what is needed in the moment, that there is not ever just if you Like, it's just it's very like basic criminality logic. It's just like, okay, sure, maybe in this one instance, punishing that one person is good, but then how does that get weaponized by the community against niggas? We always have to take that up and explain to you all the different textures in which that takes place, which is exactly why to go ask to vote next up doesn't make sense, because we are always having to explain to you the difference between shit or what niggas need in the moment, which is why the polyrhythm and why the solvency frame or the solvency burden of the act should not be about what did we produce or what are those accountability measures, because every nigga needs something different. Right? And that is a project that we all are constantly contributing to and leaning on each other for. Our argument is that the accountability that exists in debate now is something that you're constantly working with and can never be described in words or described in a single moment, because attempts to do so is only then weaponized or homogenized to be like a I'm sorry, which is exactly what the fuck we said. It's like, bitch, I don't want an I'm sorry. I want you to not be fucking racist. And the fact that that language is what you use in the K position is exactly the lens through which the judges should view that homogenous model.
Right. Yeah. So like, I get the idea that like a solid model through which accountability mechanisms operate is bad. My question is more about like the individual instances in which accountability should be demanded. Is like the critique there that like punishment in certain individual instances, like the ones that we cited, is bad, or just like the claim that you just made about
I want everyone to remember the moment that Julian has where did you ask the debater that this happened to? Let me read her name so I don't get this incorrect. Justine. Was there a conversation with Justine about what did she need? What did she want in that moment? What is that? All you had was a reflective moment about, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. That does not change what she experienced, right? Our argument is that those moments of accountability are going to look different for different people. And that is okay, because different niggas need different shit. But your attempt to be like, Asia, tell us what all of the black people need. Tell us the model. How do we hold us whites accountable? This is Jones's argument about how black people are always told or forced to tell you all what the fuck you're supposed to do. Just
I got you.
I don't know, like.
Yeah, got you. Okay. The case arguments, I didn't really catch the stuff about failure, about how it's impossible to signify failure because the black radical tradition is incomplete. Insofar as like the like example that Moten, Harney, and Shikaitis are giving is like a specific telos that they sought out, and that they did actually. I guess time's up. If you want to answer that, you can. But
I didn't really get the question, to be honest. So.
Oh, that's fine.
We have 10 minutes. I started it. Okay. I'm gonna stop it at 5:52. Oh shit, there actually are cards this time, so I will grab those and send them out. Actually, is everyone here? Anthony, are you here? Oh, dope. Okay. Order is going to be the critique and then the counter plan. Folks got the cards already, right? If I can get like thumbs up from folks or something that are good to go.
It's going to be the counterplan on what?
The K, then the counter plan.
You say it'll be the counterplan then the K?
Other way around. K, then counter plan.
I was about to say, I was like, I'm dead as hell. I was like, Anthony, you did not just do that. Because I was mostly like almost certain you were serious. And I was like, hold on.
Shit, sorry. But then Kansas, y'all good too. Okay. Dope. This round is a comparison of tactics. Is their discussion of incompleteness a better solution than what the negative has suggested as an alternative? The positions that we have forwarded are foundationally in disconnect with the thesis of the AF, i.e. we both look to the legacy of anti-blackness in debate and propose solutions based within accounts of that sort of relationality. That provides the foundational theory of competition that you should look to. We are down to have the debate about debate that the 1AC is set up to have, and think we have forwarded a model of completeness as the best starting point, a model that focuses on the structures that cause violence in anti-Black forms of violence in debate, rather than starting at the level of the individual and the relational that their Moten evidence talks about, and that the 2AC's characterization of their solvency depends upon. The sort of distinction and our argument is that about the 1AC is that every history of debate is foundationally flawed and that their theory is partially correct. Writing into the archive of debate and responding to sort of the historical erasure of the contributions of like Black debaters, Black coaches will always be incomplete. The sort of distinction between our two approaches is that we have forwarded that completeness comes at a sort of deeper level than relationality, which is foundationally good for developing mechanisms of accountability, right? The point of the sort of analysis we forwarded about the legacy of Justine's relationship to debate and the conversations that I've had with Will about that relationship means that is a sort of discussion about how there are formal and material mechanisms of change that would provide a more complete account of the debate community. For instance, the discussion and debate about like ABAP forwarding online debate norms that occurred, over the summer in preparation for the season before arriving at a sort of like complete set of rules submitted for like application and acceptance by like other colleges around the circuit is a good model and good starting point for how you should evaluate that. The sort of big point of competition that the 2AC doesn't really have a ton of game on is that their argument starts from the sort of individual and the relational and responds to the sort of individual circumstances. Our argument counter to that is that there are foundational structures that cause violence in debate, and that the starting point for responding to those should be focusing on those developing mechanisms of accountability, norms, and cultural ideas about debate that respond to those structures rather than at the sort of individual level. There's a few reasons we forwarded why that's good. The first is that our method allows for a better formation of safe spaces within the debate community that are capable of providing a response to the sort of structuring mechanisms of exhaustion that, they have described as being foundational to the way that debate occurs in the status quo. And then the second one is an argument about historicity, where only a sort of drive towards completeness brings us closer. The sort of mode of incompleteness that they have talked about always leaves certain voices and elements of history out of the discussion. We agree with Kansas that it is a sort of structural choice to include certain parts of that history in and exclude others from the 1AC. That sort of rhetorical choice of the affirmative that gets endorsed by their method necessitates a papering over of other parts of history because no submission into the archive is ever like fully complete. Obviously, it's impossible to include all of Black history and debate in the 1AC. Our argument counter to that, though, is that research practices that begin from the point of incompleteness require a more foundational understanding of that to happen, which makes a permutation impossible. The apology stuff before I do the permutation, there's a few answers to it. One is that our argument and the sort of like apology that gets forwarded in the 1NC as a like apology to Justine is a sort of recognition and implication in our divestment from the sort of norms and structures of, you know, white debate that we have foundationally criticized, like the emphasis on, you know, like gotta be like the plan USFG PRL shit, which is distinct from our argument. The second level is that we're not apologizing to you all, and we are not making an argument that we should win the debate because we've apologized, which is why the argument we forwarded goes beyond the like, I'm sorry I did like a microaggression 10 years ago that their evidence is talking about, and rather says that what is needed and what we should do is have the discussions and debates about what different mechanisms of accountability and different ways of responding to structures that cause anti-blackness in debate that we should do, which is why the end of the card that's like the apology is bad because it assuages guilt isn't what we're doing, because our argument is that we've moved beyond the like, I feel guilty about this, to the second level of that, which is there's some big problems. What are we going to do about them? The permutation argument that they have is next. If they are right and you should look at solvency differently, you should also look at competition differently as well. The sort of arguments I was explaining about historicity before provide a sort of clear crystallization of the distinctions we afforded between our two strategies and what we think are both the counterplan and the critique provide different mechanisms of approaching the question of what a more complete structure of debate would look like, which responds to and is in foundational competition with the 1AC's argument about how debate cannot ever be completed. The sort of negative ballot in this debate means putting the communication and mediation of those different strategies over incompleteness. Our argument is about centering the structures that cause exhaustion, because even though they hurt people in different ways, which is what most of the 2AC's offense is based on, the fact that people in different ways, the fact that people can do shit like that without repercussion is the generative point of the violence that they are talking about, which means that we afforded an argument about how their position remains in a sort of reactionary response where they are always considering individual instances of what Black people need rather than the sort of overarching structures that produce individual instances of violence, which means that we can recognize the world is fucked up for everyone differently rather, and that's not sort of competition. The sort of second level of that is also that, you know, the argument they have forwarded is that the affirmative and the relationalities that they have forwarded already exist and are a product of the responses to the 1AC, which means that, you know, they have fundamentally defended the status quo, which means the introduction of a comparative strategy is what actually makes, you know, the sort of competition happen. I'll also read a piece of evidence here. This debate is one of epistemology and relationality versus mechanisms. That's Bung in 97. There can be no question of mechanisms operating the putatively immaterial solar mind. Nothing happens in it. He was wrong only assuming that ideas exist by themselves and forever. A double error first corrected by Aristotle and then by the history of ideas, finally by physiological psychology. Therefore, strictly speaking, must regard the expression as a shorthand for the corresponding neuropsychological mechanisms, plans, strategies, methods, and the like, and only their implementation of physical, chemical, biological, or social matter or mechanisms regarding the immaterial mechanisms is an indicator of spiritualism or even magical thinking, is simplified by psychoanalytic half of forgetfulness in the terms of recognition. The next argument they had was the argument of assuming that everyone needs the same thing. I've been covering this a lot throughout the speech, where our argument is not that everyone needs the same things out of debate, but that the same things are, you know, causing problems in different ways for people throughout debate. The last argument they have is the thing about, you know, what I've gotten out of the 1AC through like the conversations I've had about Will with, you know, like, you know, the talk about like the history of like Louisville, the talk about the history of like Justine's relationship to debate. This sort of clarifies the distinction that we've talked about where, you know, both the like sort of status quo argument where all of those reactions in my conversations with Will like already happened, which means that there's a sort of disjunct between like the affirmation of that and the sort of like comparative approaches to the world that we've talked about. The second level and the sort of argument they were getting at in cross-ex about like these things being like recirculated outside of debate is non-unique, because like that shit already happens. That's why there was like a wave of debaters responding to Brooklyn Tech last year being like, I had panic attacks because the 1AC played Lil' Kim, which is the reason why all the like arguments they are talking about in that context are already happening in debate, which means that like this like commodification argument they're like set up in cross-ex, probably not offense for them. The counterplay. We think that the adoption of the Cal BW pref model, where some Black women must be pref by each school in their top 25% and boycotting the NDT solves the exhaustion impacts they have forwarded better. There's a few reasons. One is it provides more access for exhausted teams that understands and recognizes their value in their arguments, as well as forces misguided policy teams to experience and learn from Black women as much as those Black women's wish to serve as critics in debate rounds, which answers back the sort of labor component, because inherent in Cal BW's model isn't just like pref everyone, it's like pref with an understanding of consent in terms of like which judges actually want to be like judging those debate rounds, which which is the sort of distinction that we will draw to sort of like link out of a lot of the labor arguments that they're forwarding. The second level of that, and the other response to this labor stuff, is that those Black women would be sitting in judgment of sort of whiteness and problematic debaters on a regular basis. There's, even outside of, the sort of chance that some of those debaters might actually appreciate that stuff, the sort of broader argument is that that channels the sort of toxicity of, like white debate into channels of sort of response and retaliation, where the point is that like those sort of, that is an example of, sort of like structures of like responding to, like, for instance, if Kentucky got 8 Black women at a tournament, lost every round because they said fuck shit every round, they would obviously like change some of the arguments that they forwarded based on like the adoption of, the Cal Pref model. Rather, the argument is not that, is just that debaters who are fucked up should not win because they shouldn't be able to avoid judges who would punish them. That is the best way of encouraging the sort of, cross-library discussions that are what make debate really valuable and important and what sort of drive a lot of the generative potential of the activity. The permutation portion of the debate, you should compare sort of the relationality and exhaustion arguments that the 1AC has discussed to the completeness that we forwarded, right? We think both of these positions are impact turns to the 1AC's claim about incompleteness being a good starting point, and have provided 2 different mechanisms and understandings of why that is the case, which is why it's like impact turn, and these arguments provide the sort of uniqueness claim. Here, I actually have to take a second to prep.
Okay, are you ready?
No, sorry, I'm taking prep.
You're fine.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah, I dropped an argument, so I wanted Eugene to answer it. Okay, 5:35.
You said you were ready?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. Sorry, didn't start my timer. Now I'm not ready. What the fuck is going on? This is a mess. Except not really. We love the incompleteness. Okay, so my first question has to do with this like top of the 1AC about accountability and all of the like, or the 2NC that talks about like the accountability solutions and stuff.
So I don't know if Gabby's here. Emily just put a thing in the chat.
Oh, love that.
I'm here. Sorry, my camera was messing up.
No,
I'll be
it's
back hopefully after CS.
No, you're
Sorry.
fine. Okay. My question has to do with this stuff about anti-blackness and structures, etc. Hypothetically, if the mechanism provided by the counterplan or the model proposed by the critique are implemented, do those structures go away or become, like, is there no more anti-blackness in debate?
Right. I don't think that that is our argument. And even and the sort of presumption behind that question that I assume is like the sort of like incompleteness, completeness component, which I think is like a sort of distinction that we will draw, where our argument isn't like, you said you were incomplete because you don't try and solve all anti-blackness in debate. Comparatively, we have said that we try to solve all of it because that would be ridiculous. That's why our argument instead focuses on where we think the different starting points for how we should approach, understand, and respond to debate are.
See, and this is the problem with you over-interpolating where the question came from, right? Because my question then becomes, right, if we should start from a level of completeness, we should try to complete or to resolve things, right? I guess I'm curious as to then how or why these like strategies, right? We said like, let's ban the NDT, let's have this prepping model, right? That doesn't completely resolve anything or change the structure.
Right. I guess I'm confused by the
Well, I'm just confused any of the off case that you read solve the links.
Oh, sure. So
Right, I think, sorry, do you mind if I come in here?
yeah,
I'm about to do some of this work on the ballot double turn in the 1NR, but the question isn't like we need to solve for the entirety of the structure. Rather, we need to recognize that structure is an inevitable process and recognize that as solving for that as an incomplete project. But there are complete components.
Thank you for that introduction, because then I guess it then becomes like why this sort of like double standard, or why you should like why the app is in competition, or why the app does not recognize that structure exists.
Because we think that like in the face of the incompleteness of solving for that structure, there are teloses that we can assume for like specific instances of violence within that, which is where we think completeness comes in and is necessary to find like an endpoint to like resolving those specific instances of violence that are a result of a broader inevitable structure.
Okay, you conceded that the endpoint doesn't happen. My next argument, all of the examples that you give for how we should solve or find moments of completeness, you say ABAP, creating debate norms. You say that Black women sitting on a panel and listening to a bunch of racist fuck shit would then prevent right, all of these racist things from happening. That to me sounds like a bunch of labor or projects that Black people then have to do to resolve that shit. And then you've conceded that it's not going to solve all the anti-Blackness. So I guess I'm confused then as to like how the alternative provides a sort of like moment of redress or a moment of care for all the Black people that you've offered up to survive or solve all of these things.
Oh, sure. So two components to that. First is like in reference to, the specific like example you gave about like sitting on panels, right? Like the Cal model assumes a understanding of, like mutuality and consent with like wanting to be on those like panels and in those rounds. The second component of that and the sort of broader answer to the like we are forcing people to do labor component, I think we afforded an argument counter to that is like rather than an imposition for people to do labor, we afforded a like strategy and discussion that we think we should have about like what people should consider and what people should take out of the round. So it's not like a mandate for like any particular person to do it, which I guess is sort of like the labor thing that you're talking about.
The one in R is going to be the ballot double turn, and then case in the order of presumption, the overview, judge instruction of surrender to black shit, and then completeness good with like the recuttings. All right. Can I just get a thumbs up from everyone?
Can you get the order one more time?
Yeah. The ballot double turn, vote off to vote neg thing. The case in the order of presumption, the surrender to black shit line from the overview of the 2AC, and the completeness good debate with like the recuttings. All right, can I just get thumbs up again from everyone just to make sure everyone's good? Gabby, okay, cool. 5 judges, other team, great.
Okay, Julian, what?
Wait, what? It's the vote neg to vote af thing, and then the case.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, okay, cool. I already asked everyone. If the app is right about their thesis of incompleteness, you cannot vote app. The ballot is the representational space of affirming the telos of action, the telos of who did the better debating or who prompted the intimacy, who better prompted the intimacies of entangled relationality. That's a fundamental double turn with the construction of the 1AC. I know vote neg to vote app becomes a stupid high school rabbit hole, but it has meaning in this debate. There's no way to determine who is right about resolving the impacts of the 1AC. Then your ballot is inconclusive, meaning the presumptive ballot goes neg since they have burden of solvency. I'll do line by line here. They said the ballot has never been complete, but missignifies what voting out means. That their argument about missignification is wrong. Even if they endorsed a different model of debate or presumption, you need to consider what are the relational components between you listening to the 1AC and the rest of this debate and voting out. Specifically, what is you voting out due to forward the politics of accountability that they have said is good. The discussion of interrelationality that they afforded isn't able to arrive at a conclusion precisely because all of their 2AC answers. Yes, we agree that the Black radical tradition is terminally incomplete, but there are specific teloses that the Black radical tradition adopts, like the example that Moten and Shukaitis evidence gives for the NDI and damned, or the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, which we think is a better model of debate, where AFS can identify those particular teloses which we need to resolve and impacts that we need to resolve, which isn't to say that like AFS need to resolve all of anti-Blackness, which is the cross-ex stuff that was just happening, but rather that their claim that nothing can ever be completed within the broader imminent process of the Black radical tradition is wrong. It means that you literally can never vote AF if you adopt the idea that completeness can never happen. That also becomes a really important presumption argument, which I'll do in a minute on like voting out doesn't mean the project is finished. Obviously, voting out doesn't destroy all of anti-Blackness, but and voting neg doesn't do that either. But it's about isolating specific instances of violence as a result of broader inevitable structures, which speaks to resolving their offensive incompleteness of the Black radical tradition as a whole, while acknowledging and forwarding specific instances of complete strategies. Even if they win arguments about how there are external effects of the debates that we have with each other, i.e., Will judging them in the last debate and then talking with us before this debate, which we acknowledge is true. They can't win that the writing of the ballot itself and the submission to taproom progression to semifinals is a form of is not a form of conclusion, which is fundamentally in contradiction with the 1AC, because the conclusory position of writing a ballot literally assumes a method of completeness that they have not come to terms with. Case. the four forms of relationality they have identified already exist, have always already existed, and will always exist. There's no reason why this debate is uniquely key, and all of their arguments about relationality in this debate are not app offense, but rather reasons why the status quo solves. The answer to Zoomification, coping strategies are available in Zooms. We're having parties, even CEDA's GatherTown included games. I know that's kind of a silly argument, but even though you're a little avatar on GatherTown, it provides a way to adapt the politics of interracial relationality that they have forwarded and accommodates and circumvents Zoomification, which is living within actually, never mind. Their premise is false that they solve for it by reading the 1AC, but that's wrong. That solvency is from COVID vaccines only. The argument about surrender to black shit, you don't need to vote affirmative to surrender to black shit. Our judge instruction to you is to acknowledge the ability of black knowledge to overcome and transform the resolution into anything they want. The empirical success of the last 5 years proves that's true, and neither of these teams would have blinked an eye if the app had no bearing on the resolution in this round. Instead, you should evaluate the debate in terms of the articulated burdens by the app and vote them for the team that did the better debating in that context. The completeness good stuff, only a drive towards completeness, towards specific teloses, brings us closer. A motive incompleteness always leaves certain voices and elements of history out of the discussion. We agree with them that it is a structural choice to include certain parts of that history in and exclude others from the 1AC, but that rhetorical choice of the affirmative explicitly endorsed by their methodology necessitates a papering over of other parts of history which is necessarily violent. Obviously, it's impossible to include all of black history in debate in the 1AC. Our argument is rather that research practices which begin from the point of incompleteness require some of that exclusion to happen and make the permutation impossible. This evidence is also the evidence that they read is also in the context of the love story of Jerry Maguire from a rom-com from in the 90s. It's not contextualized as an exportable model of politics that can resolve anti-black violence in spaces like debate, especially considering that they just say Jerry Maguire is actually, never mind. Love doesn't have to be complete, but the drive towards completing that research through the project of the 1AC is good, even if we recognize that it is never attained, because it allows us to hold dominant forms of power accountable rather than preserving ontological totality. The last piece of evidence they've read in the 1AC talks about the conversations between Jeff Bridges and Bernie Glassman and how they thought through their own attachments to telos or malice aspirations, and how the Bernie Glassman's practice of Dharma undercuts the subject-object relationship. That means two things. One, our identity isn't intrinsically tied to teloses of sovereignty or violence, but rather their own evidence concedes that there are ways for us to hold ourselves accountable, which is what we're doing with the next route. That also answers the stuff about white apologies on the K flow. Second, that deconstruction happens through the incomplete conversations that we have like this debate, and to assume that that we are inevitably attached to the telos of competitiveness and violence is wrong by their own evidence. Alex, is there anything else? Like the thing that you were going to send me?
Oh, yeah. For that, I think you should just be like the
You
sort
can
of
say-
that. Yeah. The distinction on the sort of like the like K they made of like POC stuff on the counterplan is like, obviously the argument isn't that everyone experiences violence the same way, right? Which is why our argument has been like structures of debate, like, you know, the resolution, like the way the PRL tries to enforce the resolution. All of those things affect people in different ways, but the sort of response to that doesn't require the sort of individuation of particular responses, but rather holding those sort of bad actors within the community accountable, which is why it's not like everyone experiences violence the same, but like the PRL fucks everyone over.
Starting. 2:30. Sorry, Julian's getting better.
I'm surprised. It wouldn't even matter. No, we got good time. It's facts. Okay, so mindless behavior for the YouTube. Yes or no?
Give the speech first.
Nick, hey
Then we can talk about it.
yo, follow me on Twitch.
Shut up.
Hey yo.
Are you ready? Is everyone back?
Oh shit, we got people in the chat asking more mindless behavior.
That's what I'm saying. Oh my god.
So are we yes or no on the mindless behavior while we wait?
Okay, but see, I'm so glad that I'm not the only one that was like, yeah, dude.
Oh, we got two mindless behavior in the chat.
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Who are we waiting for? Go. Just
We're
go.
waiting for 4 judges.
Just go. Just go. It's fine. Dude. Okay, am I the only person that also had the movie though? Like the World Tour movie? Because that shit hit.
This video is dumb hard.
That's so true. Okay, that's what I'm saying. I had everything facts.
Well, I had everything.
Okay, yeah, we see.
So we're saying Amber and Hannah.
But I bet you do.
All right. Good for an order. Well, I'm just gonna keep it on. That's a speech. You good? Okay. Case. Vote neg to vote F. Counter plan. Critique. Be like 3 off in the blow. Damn.
Sorry, can you repeat that order?
Yeah. Case. Vote neg to vote F. Counter plan. K. And let me make sure I scroll to the top. And all this. Okay. We all good? All right. Gabby, can I get like a thumbs up emoji? Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna start in like 5 seconds. Estimate a verbal inference. Clearly unique this argument, they have no game on the sense of zoomification to make this complicated the rhythmic potentiality of debate by accelerated distance between us, which means that the end is necessary to reclaim the polyrhythm from the drumless status quo of online debate or exhaustion impact should frame it because they've reformally indebted themselves in opposition to indebtedness by affirming that niggas always need to generate something unique or new, which causes fatigue because it means that niggas only have to produce it or only value for their production, part and parcel with debate's logic of separation, the idea that we should change arguments top of the topic situate F and neg in opposition to each other, which will be impact turned on all other sheets prefer the polyrhythm we need collectivity, not individuation. The S is tap in because we're constantly working and reworking the work they got done. So the only way to energize is to explore the frequencies between us. If you felt us at all during the debate we solved, did you remember an after you forgot a debater that mattered to you? Did you feel our shit when we talk? If so, tap in, surrender, argument for all of the niggas. This means prioritizing the space for feeling the polyrhythm solvency for the staff. In this debate is going to look different, feel different. For years, we've decided that debates and debaters value off of what they produce, whose voices are in your head. Lean into them, find the voices of all the niggas that you might have forgotten, and let them guide you for why people. It means tap in and don't make us do any more work for the whites. The lumber line that they have already existed. Presumption arguments are af uniqueness, assess whether now or never unique or separate. The CEDA gathering looks different online, so it doesn't solve simplification. Will be largely explained below. The drive towards completeness bring us closer. Stuff is inevitably left out of discussion, which is a 2C infinite regression argument. It's a tactical choice because those are the niggas that we're close to. It doesn't paper over people because we don't know all the niggas in the world. And also, what does voting negative do to solve any of that? The Jared McGuire stuff is compartmentalized and exportability. In fact, we don't need to be exportable. In fact, that's our offense. The hold accountable stuff. We solve that better because we can adjudicate those disputes via conversation, not punishment. The to assume we're tied to competition stuff is wrong because you have indebted yourself to the logic of competition.
Ballot double vote after vote egg.
Vote after vote egg sheet. They're called to focus on specific instances of violence. It's a double term with a historicity link because they only focus on specific instances of violence. Also results in erasure because those specific instances get used to describe or umbrella everyone's experience within, which is what is happening in this debate. Perfectly explained by absence last time. The wonder not everybody is affected, but structured in the same way. But the PRL fucks all of us over. It makes no sense. It is an offense for them if they cannot win, that they completely get rid of the structure. Then the distinction of how people are affected matters more. The permutation of both their stuff misunderstands our critique of completeness. Our critique is having an idea of completeness. It's unilateral determination of what is good to solve a problem, which is reified by resolutional debate. Incompleteness is better because it recognizes the overpopular nature. They are still the high school shit because they have overdetermined the role of the ballot to be the affirm the telos of better debating. We have redefined what the ballot means in accordance with our dissemination model. What does voting have to do to forward policies of accountability? Because people take is different, which is why you can't arrive at one conclusion. The telos and impacts we need to resolve stuff is not tied to an impact. They still force us to identify a problem and generate a solution to that, which is a strategy forcing stuff that we have explained. The violent structure stuff will be answered on the other K, and they can't answer why us progressing in the tournament is a contradiction or is in contradiction with conclusion. So it's not offense for them. The counterpoint. The answer to most of our stuff was just consent. How? They have no explanation of how Black women just opt out. They have said that there's consent, but haven't explained what this looks like. Our offense is to the flip side. What happens when Black women don't want to judge? They get blamed for not solving racist whites. This is our gripe that their shit is all about what Black women can do for them, but not about what they've done for Black women, which proves our argument about how they just ceaselessly force Black women to labor to correct racist white people like the ones that go to Kentucky. Whiteness on a regular basis stuff proves that they link. In fact, they make retaliation inevitable. Because Kentucky won't just take 0 and 8 lying down. They would retaliate in the debate, in the post round, etc. The Kentucky got 8 Black women stuff proves our argument that Black women are always already expected to take up that lever. And we're impact turning it if we win any of our stuff to the other critique because they want Black women to be the arbiters of punishment, which means that we turn their stuff, the specificity DA still applies because you use the rhetoric of color, which homogenizes because you aren't analyzing why they're different. You are just saying they are, which is how you have embodied saying people of color because you lack specificity for anti-Blackness. But it doesn't matter because all this shit is not unique because they consider the NDT is it the only thing that's racist or exhausting, and the permutation that these are both compatible strategies. Okay. They shouldn't be held in competition with one another. Permutation of both. What you got from the F demonstrates that the F solved. The fact that you're saying this F reminded you of this debater who thinks this thing, and it changed the way I think about debate, proves the relational model that the F supporting is necessary to the alternative, which means that you should interpret permu both as we have our redubbing of Moon and Harney, and they redub that redubbing with what they got from the 1AC, which proves that they aren't in tension. In fact, the conversation with Will proves our argument because it was only post listening to the app and being reminded of a debater that Will thought of this strategy. Apology K on top. You should view the next offense through the politics of apology. Both are kind of playing K misses the boat because it assumes there's a complete end or remedy to violence. K completeness doesn't solve because it assumes that after an apology is administered that niggas don't still feel the exhaustion or pain. The alternative doesn't solve because it doesn't ask Justine what she needed, but even if they did, it still doesn't mean that every nigga needs the same shit she did. It's about the broader model you justify, so it's not just whether you apologize. For us, this is our impact term that they think they know what niggas need, but niggas need a solution, but niggas don't have a solvable problem. It's an argument that they drop. The every history stuff is never complete. Is the app's argument. Completeness comes at a different level of relationality. How is that complete? The ABAP stuff doesn't matter because not every tournament used them. We were still recorded. Niggas are still surveilled and being policed and other venues as well. we create a policy of accountability stuff, drop the impact turn to that, or impact turn into the language of punishment, because it's basic criminal justice logic, the idea that there's some bad people, and that these should be the people that go to jail. Same logic that they've applied by saying that we should punish racist invaders. They're missing the point, because they're right that it's punishment as a paradigm that legitimates that punishment should be allowed, which results in things like policing at tournaments or reading a framework to punish black teens for being non-topical, etc. The historicity stuff is infinitely regressive. Conversations what the app produces, they aren't looking at it differently. They're just like, they aren't looking at competition differently. They're just like, we compete because we're distinct. We do center the structures because we have uniqueness. Arguments about zoomification. They link to being reactionary because they react to the structures of violence. They have defended the status quo. Nothing is ever new, and this is our offense because they always expect niggas to generate something new. But our argument is that we need to break down the barriers that separate us, which also answers all of the rest of the stuff about how the shit is already happening. Like, presumption is not a winning ballot versus this argument. Nothing is ever new.
Okay, we have 5:35. I started it.
Can you check Messenger again? Are the other judges here as well? Okay. Anthony's here as well. Awesome. Order is going to be the critique, the counterplan, the case, and then the ballot framing if I am, for some reason, a speed demon. Everyone good? Okay.
What is it?
Oh, sorry. K, counterplan, case, the ballot framing argument. All right. Sorry, Emily, and then Kansas USC. Y'all good? Okay. Good. Honestly, before this debate, I probably also would have put my money on Kansas versus USC, but they have made way too many technical concessions, despite the 1AR being like twice as fast as me for them to win this debate. We have made a framing argument where they have said that completeness is always bad, but the negative has said that we should find completeness within incomplete projects, i.e. victories and milestones that should be recognized, embraced, and accepted as victories. They have conceded the top level framing question of this round being a comparison of tactics. Is their discussion of incompleteness a better suggestion than what the negative has forwarded as an alternative, i.e. the positions that we have read are foundationally in disjunction with the thesis of the AF, right? My response to the AF is the sort of disjunction of should strategies start from being complete or incomplete, where both of us look to the sort of legacy and historicity of anti-blackness in debate and then propose solutions that are based within an account of relationality. They have conceded the safe spaces net benefit to our argument about how our method allows for a better formation of spaces within the debate community that are able to carve out the forms of relationality that they are talking about and that are able and capable of providing a response to the sort of structuring mechanisms of exhaustion that exist in the status quo. For instance, the example Eugene was giving about the reason why, none of us in the room bat an eye when an AF doesn't say something topical, whereas 20 years ago that would have been, forbidden, is a sort of like the same sort of like project of like norm restructuring and teleological victory that we should sort of celebrate, and that the critique, counterplan, all of the positions sort of like arrive at as that impact turn argument. The sort of biggest point of offense that they have at the top of like this page and at the top of the counterplan is the argument about the permutation. The sort of framing thing for that is that they have said that solvency should be viewed differently in this debate because everything they're talking about is about sort of the reaction that you have to the 1AC, or the sort of reaction that like we have had to the 1AC. The sort of process of that like generation of social relations in debate, then the 1ANC is a sort of countervailing response to that and says that there is a different starting point that is a better way to arrive at a response to the sort of structures of exhaustion that exist in the status quo. This becomes especially important when they concede the Bung piece of evidence that I read in the 2NC that talks about how the sort of starting point of the 1AC, which is the same sort of thing their Moten evidence describes as the sort of process of being something that needs to be broken down and individuated, gets contextualized in the Bung evidence as a sort of question of relationality versus mechanisms, whether strategies start from the sort of point of being reactive or from the point of being active, where we have said that that sort of teleological focus is the way to carve out those spaces for relationality, which is like the basic turns case argument that we have arrived at. The first argument they have on the critique is the argument about how we prove the sort of like relationality effect of the AF through the conversations that we've had with Will. The distinction that we will draw here is also clarified by the Bung evidence, because it's the distinction between framing that sort of relationality and that reaction to the 1AC versus the question of the actions that follow on and the sort of what is to be done. The next set of arguments they have is the sort of the apologies point of offense. There's a few answers to it that they haven't really come to terms with, because the arguments are, first off, one that we don't assume, we haven't made an assumption about like what is needed on an individual level, rather made a claim that there are structures that drive exhaustion in the status quo. The second argument is that the sort of difference that we have forwarded, there's a difference we have forwarded in terms of like all of their offense on this starts from the point of, you know, having the conversation stop at the apology and stop at the feeling of guilt, whereas the 1NC is a process of sorting, moving through and moving past that. The next section of arguments that they have is this sort of like punishment logic and the criminal justice. There's a few answers to it that they don't really have a ton of game on. First is that this is deployed now against Black debaters, which is the argument I was making about people having panic attacks in response to Lil Kim and Brooklyn Tech's 1AC. The second argument about this is that the affirmative also has a mechanism of responding to those things through saying that we should alter this, look to sort of teleological changes in the norms and cultures of accountability that exist within debate to provide those models of punishment, right? They do not resolve any of the punishment stuff, which means that they don't get any offense off of like saying the punishment logic is good. The sort of last arguments they have are the things about us linking to reactionaries too. This is all read through the lens of the Bung evidence, which I was explaining above, the counterplan. I'm not going for it as a separate strategy, but I'll answer the labor and production arguments that they have forwarded. All of those arguments that they have made are fundamentally inevitable aspects of the status quo, right? The fact that there are people who the fact that there are Black women judges who attend tournaments and who like who like are on pref sheets implies a sort of inevitable production of labor. The sort of response that you have to the 1AC is in and of itself a sort of process of like affective and emotional labor in terms of how you like interpolate and understand that, which is also something that they cannot break down, which means that it's only a question of what that labor then sort of like orients towards, or if we have said it should orient towards sort of spaces that can resolve that structure of exhaustion, which is the sort of inversion of this like wanting to make them produce, which is our argument. The second level of offense they had here was the thing about, you know, reactionary whites at Kentucky. This is also the status quo. And we've made arguments about how focusing on the norms and institutions of debate is the best way to resolve that, because that determines, you know, or that is the only chance of, you know, responding to reactionaries. The next argument is this like POC critique. The point of the argument is like my relationship to the resolution is different from your relationship to the resolution, which is different from, you know, an Asian debater's relationship to the resolution, or is different from like other POC. Right. The point of that, though, is that the resolution is still a like violent structure that implicates different parts of the community. And so rather than the sort of flattening or paternalistic argument that's like, we will say like what is best for everyone in particular, our argument says that that should be abstracted out to the level of the structural, the case stuff. The sort of top level problem and the uniqueness argument that they flagged at the top of the 2AC and the 1AR, the argument about the sort of Zoom is the like Zoom offense. There's a few answers to it. One is that the answer they gave to the GatherTown stuff as like a way of cultivating that sort of community and sort of relationality within debate was that your avatar looks different, which doesn't answer any of the sort of relationality components that they were talking about, because that's not like a visual component. The second level of it is that they also, in your ballot, doesn't resolve any of that stuff, which means it's just a question of the different orientations you sort of prioritize towards and orient towards debate. The last step is the like roll of the ballot stuff. I was doing this at the top. The sort of other part of this that they haven't really responded to is just like the ballot doesn't resolve any of it because your reaction already happened.
Starting. Okay, it's gonna be case and then the critique. Waiting for people to get back, or just give me confirmation that they're present, and I can do it again, obviously, but yeah. Gabby, love it. Rayvon, love it. Emily, love it. Just waiting for Amber and Anthony. Amber, check. Rayvon, love your turtleneck.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Anthony, cool. Do you all do the order again? Right. Amber, it's case, and then the critique. And then everyone's good. Starting if no one stops me. Sweet. I'm starting the 2-hour with our judge instruction because it was functionally conceded and it's our debate framework. It's how you should filter all of their offense. We are winning an impact turns to the logic that asks or strategy are only valuable if they produce something in a particular way because it presupposes that that niggas are not constantly in production in debate for each other and around one another. Mona and Harney literally say it shouldn't be a question of whether or not we fix something, but did we feel something more deeply? Who are the voices in your head? Who inspired you to do something different in this community? This is all of our argument about the ways in which even the strategy of the negative is inspired from the conversations they've had. Well, all of those things are good. It's not a justification for the presumption argument, but about a continuation and an affirmation of that work because resolutional debate and the call for producing something in particular just to be negated is constantly exhausting us because we are never producing enough because it erases all the conversations and the relationships that we do have and the things that it creates for one another. For years, the way that we decided debates and our values off of what we produce, we say fuck that, which is our fuck completeness argument, which is exactly why their ballot shit or any of their offense on the creek don't make sense. Our argument is for my niggas to lean into those voices here. What I'm saying is saying none of the shit that makes sense are nothing about being black in debate makes sense, which is why it requires a litany of different solutions or approaches to those things, which is why only the permutation can resolve any of the offense or things talked about in the debate. For my white people, it means tap in and don't make us do more work for these whites, which is exactly our double turn arguments with the critique as well. That doesn't affirm some shit that you know isn't going to work because we are always affirming different complete solutions. But our argument is that even though you can't affirm those things, it means that it doesn't mean that the work is done and that we have to keep laboring for those things. So it's a question of how do we provide energy for those things. Our app is a reclamation of the polyrhythm. It's something you can tap into. It's a way to generate energy that combats that exhaustion from the expectation of always needing something new. And it says that being incomplete is fucking okay, which is something they haven't answered. The presumption argument stuff, I'll do it next. It says the ballot for presumption is incoherent versus that because the whole point is that nothing is ever new, which they conceded the strategy we create in debate are never disconnected from the strategies that we picked up from other people, the way that we communicate, the coaches, etc. We have generated unions for the necessity to adapt with our Zoomification stuff as well because it suggests that Zoom is operating as a barrier to accessing the rhythm between debaters, etc. Julian's argument wasn't just at the level of our avatars look different, but about the ways in which being physically present with one another generates a different vibe. We can tell more stories, etc. But also the way that it limits that production. Mona and Harney, you're saying that when we are talking about necessity of stopping the process, we have blocked us from that sharing, which is something the app and the polyrhythm is able to do through that reclamation. It doesn't necessitate a breakdown of Zoom, which answers their ballot solve stuff, but it's just about your ballot signifying how and whether or not you tap in. I'll do the permutation stuff in a second. The one I see the K is next. The one I see participated in their shit about starting points. We have critiques. They're called that this space should always be about produce, and do. Niggas do a lot of work. I do all that stuff above, but it also demonstrates that it's not the strategies, or the strategies are not incompatible because we have started with the 1AC and you still read things that you or other black people wanted to do. That is good, but saying that the ballot should signify that is the best and only solution is bad because it reproduces that exhaustion I do above. The perm is the best argument for resolving those things. I'll do it here. The permutation is permutation. Do both. It's the toughest question you'll have to answer is what impact am I voting for? Even if they win, their stuff could be good in the abstract. They're lacking a reason why they want to see precludes those things. The 2-hour was entirely too defensive. They don't have any of the redefining competition stuff in the 2-hour and the perm account for the framing at the top of the 2-hour about starting points because you were able to arrive at that new starting point or you were able to say, well, that sounds like a good idea, but it ignores the ways that even though they don't get rid of all of the solutions that black people still have to keep continue to do their work, which leads me to the politics of apology stuff. You should filter all of their offense through the cave of completeness solves it because it assumes that after the cave of completeness doesn't resolve it because it assumes that after an apology, after a punishment, or after a complete strategy that no more work has to be done, but niggas are always picking up that work, which is exactly the example that I'm giving. It's like what happens when like black women are like, no, I don't want to judge in this thing. We get blamed for that shit. We have to explain to people why we don't want to do that shit. Our argument is that even if you think that all of that is good, one, the app was key to opening up the space to have a dialogue about different strategies in the way that incompleteness is the best way to understand that, because it doesn't hold niggas to a standard of always having to be complete for a community that sometimes shits on us. Like, that shit is fucking exhausting, and they have not answered how do we help that exhaustion. They've said, well, no, that exhaustion doesn't happen because you don't force anyone to do anything. That's not true, because subconsciously debate does ask us to do a lot of fucking shit, and they have not answered that. Our argument is that the polyrhythm and being able to tap into that shit and be able to lean on other niggas, to be able to listen to the voices in your head, listen to the people that came before you and how they influence your decisions is something that helps that exhaustion, but also the fact that you're not abiding by you should be complete, you should have a complete solution all the fucking time about what you need, also resolves the exhaustion stuff, because it is okay for niggas to be incomplete. It's okay for us to not always have to produce all that shit all the time. And that's not something that they have said. They have prescribed a solution. They said, this is the best thing. This is what you niggas need. And that's not always fucking true. There's that. The rest of the apology stuff, it's not about whether or not you apologize to us or not. It's about the fact that that is the model that they justify. It's like, well, yeah, an apology is a complete solution. It means that violence is over. No, it is not, because we still feel that shit, which is why the feeling overview or the feeling articulation of how you frame the impact is so important. Because instead of the ballot being about, well, what did you saw? What did you feel when you heard the 1AC? Maybe you didn't feel any of that shit, and that's fine. But that does allow for you to think about, okay, what have I felt differently? Or what would have changed my approach to that stuff? The presumption stuff also doesn't make any sense, because it conceded that nothing is ever new. Like, I don't really know what else I can say other than this debate was tautological as fuck. Mostly because that's our argument, is that nothing is ever truly complete. And these conversations are way more effective at like diving into that than not. And we think that that community process is good versus this like model that debate constantly causes us to be in competition, to always be producing some shit that isn't new or is new or whatever the fuck. It's like, I don't understand what the perm or why the perm doesn't solve any of this offense. Mostly because they also didn't really extend an alternative that solves the links better absent the permutation. It's just like the app, at the very least, was what produced this conversation, and it should be rewarded for that shit. I don't understand what other offense they could possibly have for that. The last thing is this like safe spaces net benefit, answered by all the interrelationality community stuff. Good debate.
Yeah, great round, y'all.
Hi, everyone. We have a decision whenever everybody's here.
Kansas USC is here.
Awesome.
NYU's here too.
Perfect. Thank you. And I see 1 judge, 2 judge, 3. And I think I am just looking for Amber. And nope, there's Rayvon. Perfect. So I just need to confirm that Amber's here, and then Rayvon's giving a thumbs up. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. All right, y'all. Congratulations on reaching the quarterfinals of the 2021 CEDA National Championship. It's an amazing honor, and we're all really proud of the work that you did to get here. The winner on a 4-1 decision is the University of Kansas, Southern California. Congratulations, y'all. And a big congrats to NYU. Congratulations on a fantastic tournament. I'm going to turn it over to the judges. Great job, y'all.
Yeah. Hola. I sat. I figured I would sit, honestly. I literally said, okay, I'm pretty sure I sat. That was the first part I said in the decision. So I just think the problem for me in this debate is just that the 2AR left like 1 or 2 doors open for me. That makes me feel weird voting AV. So first, I think the 1AR is extending the impact to the winning 2AR argument about what does the negatives model look like when Black women don't want to judge. The 1AR says that it just makes Black women, quote, labor to correct white people, which makes retaliation inevitable, which then is connected to the argument that the negative wants Black women to be the arbiters of punishment. And those 2 arguments really filter out the entire model of the negative, but more so also complicate and force the negative's hand to deal with what happens when Black women, like for instance, say they want to judge, but like don't really want to. They just want bread, or they feel obligated to be an educator, or, the many pressures that Black women experience in debate. I just think the 2AR is not extending the 1AR's indictment of the negative, using Black women as fodder for their own shit without really asking or getting at how they can never know the true thing. And I thought that should have just, that would have been great defense that was not extended. I think had those arguments been extended in the 2AR, I would have voted after solely on the disadds to the negatives model, but they aren't, and I'm kind of confused about why the permutation solves anything really. It's like you're saying the negatives model results in exhaustion, and you explain the perm through the relational capacity to feel and lean on others, and so I'm just confused because I don't think the app's leaning and energy is used for the exhaustive movements, or at least that jump, like the AF is the internal link to those exhaustive movements, and the energy is the way to solve the alternative, was not how the permutation was characterized, at least for me. So for me, the 2NR's articulation of the tactics framework about what providing a model that would create safe spaces as a net benefit, carving out forms of relationality, like the alternatives about affirming completeness within incomplete projects, all celebrating those victories, whatever the fuck. The relationality versus mechanism stuff wasn't really answered well by the AF. I think the 2NR answers to the apology stuff being like the clarification through action versus reaction, what is to be done, we must move past guilt arguments. I think the lack of extending those 1AR arguments means that the negative going for some solid defense about how Black women adjudicate tournaments and being in those rounds is inevitable production of affective and emotional labor, and about how that interpolation means the debate should be about our orientation. And I think the negative provides a model that resolves or gets at the exhaustion given the 2AR, and that through the 2AR's argument about how Black women always do, I think really fucked me up on about how to resolve the permutation, because I didn't know how the permutation resolved the exhaustion stuff. So I just voted negative on their heuristic of completeness as a better way to produce safe spaces in a world where Black exhaustion is inevitable. So
I'll actually go. Thank you. I'm melting. I'll go next. Because it's weird because it's like I don't even vote like on a permutation, because like I actually think that like I'm more convinced about what the negative is saying, because it's like actually what I understand about the two strategies is that y'all are being like we are focusing on completeness, they are focusing on incompleteness. The thing that I thought confused me is that by the 2R, I feel like you're describing this as a question of like starting points. What I thought that this was going to be in the 1NC was just like, or like how it was going to develop was, you know, you being more or less like there are things, Rich, where like sort of how like Anthony like just described, it sort of sounds like a tactics thing, right? Where you're like, we actually need to be able to pay homage to the things, the tactics, or like things that people do that can be viewed as like incomplete in a way, but like are actually sort of like complete. Like I thought that this was going to be a counter reading like of the archives, because I feel like in the 1NC you like read this card about the archives that I don't ever like feel like was ever talked about again, which I feel like could have been very, very helpful, because right, like I feel like what you're trying to do, like I thought you were even telling an alternative like history like in the beginning of the 1NC, where you're like there was all this other shit that was happening, like they don't tell the, you know, full story of Louisville. But then I feel like by the time of the 2NR that gets like watered down to just being like, oh, like we started completeness, they started incompleteness, yada yada yada. So it's like, I mean, you know, and again, it's funny because as much as both of you all are telling me to have different understandings of like competition and all this other shit, it's like naturally I'm defaulting in my head to being like, I don't think that the negative proof that the app is a bad idea. And I feel really bad doing that, but I'm saying like, you know, if the conversation had not been one of like starting points, but been one of like, how should we approach the archives? Like, how should we approach Black exhaustion? Like, how should we approach some of these things? I would be more willing to be like, actually, I do think that you are right. Like we should look at some of these things as being complete things, because it's like the whole thing that they're trying to say with this like incompleteness is just that like, and I said this to the last team that judged them. It's like, I really think that y'all should push, first of all, competition theory. Like I would have went hard on that. Some type of like T argument. Like I feel like I've seen y'all even clock people on like cap, which I think that would have even been sufficient thing here. But I feel like you need to push back on this question of what does it mean for something to be like new? Because it's like when you cite niggas in the academy, your shit is new. I'm sorry. I just fundamentally believe that. It's like something being new isn't about it never being seen or like done before. And I feel like that's not mutually exclusive with saying that completeness as a way of viewing the archives is a better way of incompleteness, because niggas are good enough. And I know you can't say niggas are good enough, but your point should just be that like some of the things that are being done is good enough. And instead of looking at those things as incomplete and not paying homage to them, we should look at them as complete and as always in the process of being completed, not necessarily as in the process of being incomplete. I have other things that I can kind of say after everyone else gives their decision, but that's just the crux of how I saw it.
I can go next unless anyone else wants to. I just want to first say great job, NYU, on an amazing tournament. Congrats on a great career, Alex. It's always been a pleasure seeing you debate, and y'all are amazing. But I think for me, the 2NR was just a bit too defensive to where at the end of the day, I'm not entirely sure what I'm voting for. At the top of the 2NR, you say this round is about comparing tactics and whether projects should be incomplete or not. And I end up thinking incompleteness is probably good. I don't have much of an offensive answer to the 2AR's exhaustion arguments, but specifically when we approach conversations about strategies or tactics with the idea that we need to arrive at a complete solution, that in itself becomes exhausting and a barrier to entry, which is why the starting point of the conversation is good. I think the closest I get to resolving these exhaustion questions are the labor inevitable arguments and consent I guess, and you consent to how much you labor and judge arguments, but I don't think that resolves the arguments about retaliation or blame in those instances that Black judges do choose to say no under the next model. I end up buying that incomplete models are uniquely good because they don't allow us to think that everything has been resolved or can be resolved, but also allows for, I guess, disagreements when a solution is put in place that doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And I think the last thing I kind of look to is the safe places argument, but by the end of the debate, I don't have a reason why the AF uniquely precludes forming those spaces, especially given, I guess, the relationality arguments they're making, but also there can be punishments and models of accountability that don't need to be like uniformly put in place. I don't have a unique reason for the neg from the neg why punishment structures are necessarily good, other than I guess the downsides to them are already happening in the SQO, which I don't think is a sufficient neg ballot, at least in my mind. But I thought it was a really good debate, y'all.
Yeah, I also just want to say congratulations to NYU. Really fantastic debate. I think that I'm pretty similar to Gabby in that it's less that I'm voting for the perm and more that I don't know that there's a strong argument to be made that the app is a bad idea. So not to, repeat some of the things that other people have said, but it seems to me that incompleteness can resolve various things that allow us to approach things differently, that don't foreclose or put demands on productivity, in that sense can solve exhaustion. I really do want to echo also what Raybon was saying about how the archive arguments, if those had been a much larger component of the debate for me, definitely would have persuaded me more to the negative. I think that there were really some opportunities for the negative to win, but ultimately I didn't really end up with a kind of coherent story about how I should think incompleteness or how I should think completeness and their interaction and what a strong trade-off kind of disad. And thinking about some of the potential ways to characterize, because I understand why it would be hard. It's just tricky when we're speaking so abstractly about the things. And I'm really sympathetic to a lot of the arguments that the negative is making about needing to kind of therefore think about the structures that kind of constitute things and the embedded relations, et cetera. And I think maybe just starting off the 2NR for me, like framing what's at stake in these things and how to distinguish how we kind of think about how the app has thought of incompleteness versus how the negative is thinking completeness, and what's at risk in the way that those things could be appropriated might have really helped me to kind of sit on something and make the decision that there is something to be wary of in the project of the app and vote negative. So. But it was a really excellent debate, and congratulations.
Awesome. Congratulations, everybody, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to judge this debate. I'm really glad I got to watch you all in this debate. Also, congratulations to Alex for a sick career. I've seen you be wildly versatile at this tournament, which I think is one of the most impressive things about you. I will try not to reiterate everything else everybody has said, but I vote affirmative to endorse polyrhythm as a method for revival and energy through whereby people could connect through what they feel as a way to say but completeness for what debate demands. I think something that's really important for me is the framing arguments for judge instruction. I think at the end of the debate, my judge instruction is solely almost given by the affirmative and is to tap in and is to lean into what I feel. I think that it kind of gets lost in the 2NR as to what I'm supposed to do with everything. Because I don't think there's a really extension of that. So then I'm just like, yeah, when the one I see was being read, I'm like, what do I feel? Thinking about how much I miss debating with Sunday or using coloring to facilitate debates, things like that, and the interconnectedness between people, or even like when we debated Julian. But I also think that the sort of feeling framing allows for judges to have a lot of reflection or interpretation and think about their relationships to others. So like Gabby coaching us, making that argument, or everybody else on the panel judging us, making that argument. For me, I think it's just like a sufficient reason to vote affirmative and to not vote on any of the sort of presumption arguments that are being made. I won't like wildly reiterate what about sort of the stuff on the K. I don't think there's like a super persuasive link argument, I guess, at the end of the debate. And I think that the kind of exhaustion arguments about interconnectedness resolve the safe space impact you're going for. I also don't vote on the permutation, but thinking of it more as like it's just going for a prerequisite argument whereby like the affirmative was necessary to begin the conversation about the strategy for the negative. So the permutation becomes almost an irrelevant question whereby the affirmative is a prerequisite to those conversations to ever occur. I agree that the Membe evidence just kind of disappears, and that kind of would have been sick to see questions about the archive. And the last thing I'll say, just not to be repetitive, is this Zoom stuff. I don't think that Gather, like as a platform, resolves the Zoomification of debate. I think the affirmative is just right in terms of just like the spatial and physical relationships between people matter and are ways to connect to others. But really awesome debate. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It's really appreciated. And then thank you all for judging and super helpful comments and very nice all of you. And then USC Kansas, great job. Good luck.
Woo, Alex. Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, Alex.
And thank y'all. Thank you, Asia and Julian. Like honestly, like it really speaks to like the incompleteness. You know what I mean, Alex? Like your journey is not complete as a senior, and like we love you, NYU. Like honestly, like you're an amazing debater. You contribute so much to this community, and I'm getting so emotional right now. But we love you so much. I love you so much, and congratulations for an amazing career.
Yeah, we'd like to reiterate, great job, y'all. I don't want to like rush the shits or whatever, but a great debate. Thank you for sharing that moment with us, and thank you all for your feedback.
Thank you all.